Zehava, I know that um, we are supposed to talk about the Palestinian arena, but I feel that I can't avoid. I have to say something about the Ukraine. I just arrived at the end. To the discussion. I didn't listen to all the discussion, but I think that we cannot speak about the Palestinian arena without thinking about Ukraine and without thinking about these long-term habits of Israeli governments to help countries who infringes human rights. So I heard what Avi Gil said. He said that Israel helps countries in distress, but the thing is not how much we help countries in distress. The question is why do we help countries that infringe human rights, like in Argentina, Franco's Spain, Idi Amin's, etc. So I think that there is no other state, maybe besides North Korea, that we didn't help by selling them, I don't know, Pegasus or in order to, and even today, when we see the Israeli government's conduct with respect to Russia and the Ukraine, and now I don't want it to sound too simplistic, and I understand how complicated it is, and I understand the different considerations, and I listened to my friend Limor Livnat. She spoke about retaining Israel's identity, because we're not going to be invaded, but hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And I think that you're calling it like you're taking two steps further, one step back, and there is Lapid and there is Bennett, and the opposition keeps quiet. And I think that it's a disgrace. And I think that in a couple of years, they will compare us to what Switzerland did during the Second World War. We live in a country which is the country of the Jewish people and all of its citizens. We have a duty to protect the Jews and all other minorities. And our conduct so far, I wrote something from Tamir's statement. He said that people live here feeling as if it were October 73. I know. We feel like we are still a victim, as if it's still the 60s or the 70s. I remember studying with a friend of mine for an exam, and then the war broke, but we're not there anymore. So we tend to think that if we think about morals, it's a weakness. We cling to this policy, and we always see ourselves as victims. But the real victims are the Palestinians, the 55-year-long occupation. I actually know that military regime was not there was no military regime for 6 months in '67, and besides that, there is constant military regime. And they always explain to us, I'm criticizing my friends here, I'm a leftist, I have no problem with it, I'm not sending anyone out, and standards are a matter of we set the standards, and they always explain to us that we control the Palestinians and we need to separate for them because it's a strategic need, because otherwise if we continue to control them, it endangers us. We need to separate from them. Nobody actually says, I'm speaking about a policy. I'm not speaking about individual. I'm not speaking about political parties. I'm speaking about the governments that managed Israel's policy. Nobody said, listen, we cannot control millions of people because it's immoral. And I understand, he said that, but in a very particular situation, in a quite a cynical way. Although I supported it, so nobody actually said it at the level of policy. Nobody said that Israel's foreign policy also includes morals. A country cannot control another nation for 55 years. I just remembered what the former Prime Minister Netanyahu said. He said in a closed room, there was a discussion about the Palestinian, and there was a discussion, and all members of Likud party attended this discussion. So I want to quote him. I want to offer you two quotes. It's about control and occupation. He said that at the end of 2018, it was a Monday, Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting, "The nations respect morality up to a point and respect power much more. We do not believe in occupation. The occupation is not the problem because countries conquer other countries and nobody say anything about it. Nobody complains about Turkey or what they've done in North Cyprus. I must tell you that at least that was the time he actually said he said it, that occupation, it's not the more important thing. That was the first time he admitted, he said what he actually thought. He said that power and force is the only thing which matters. And then he continues, and I'm quoting, "It shouldn't stop us vis-a-vis diplomatic success." And what did he mean when he said huge diplomatic success? He talked about alliances that we reached at the time that he was a prime minister. So I speak about how the government of Israel, headed by Netanyahu, actually tried to befriend all these tyrants like Orban and the Honduras president that is now on trial. These were the alliances that we formed. Is it moral? Do you think the state power is more than its military power? When Israel was at the time of independence scroll, we formed an alliance with European countries and the US. And what happened in the past decade? No, I don't think that we should be proud of some of these things. And but this thing, a prime minister is standing, a former prime minister, and explains to us, what is this occupation? Nobody cares about occupation. Why do we care about millions of peoples we control? And this is his opinion. So there's no wonder that in the survey presented by Shmuel Rosner, we saw the public's opinion. The public opinion is affected by the leaders. We've been brainwashed by the leaders, and this is how he actually expresses his opinion. So I spoke about Netanyahu, and I want to remind the Abraham Accords. He explained to us that he talked about peace for peace. We know that normalization happened was because we actually managed to give up on the annexation plan. And the most impressive thing he said during these ceremonies, what was his main point in the moral context? He said, Abraham Accords, they did not consider the Palestinians. What did he explain to us? He explained that he managed to break this perception that was really dominant, that countries do not sign agreements with Israel if we won't sign agreements with us if we don't solve the Palestinian problem. He said that now it's peace for peace and we won't have to pay any price. And Einat, you said something. Maybe it doesn't sound good. No, the problem is not that it doesn't sound good. The problem is that it's immoral. If we explain to the public, now let's talk about Bennett. Bennett explained to us in his famous speech in the UN that the Israeli public doesn't wake up in the morning thinking about the Palestinian conflict. We don't care about that, and there won't be a Palestinian state here. He told that to Biden. So what's the message to the Israeli public? That we can remain in our comfort zone, and Israel public lives in a comfort zone. We don't care about what's going on here. If it's a bit far from our neighborhood, we got used to it. If the public doesn't feel the price we pay for conflict, if the public doesn't feel the price, it doesn't demand anything from its leadership. It doesn't demand these moral elements to become part of its policy. And then it all becomes a group of interest. We need to be strong and stronger. And look at the discussion yesterday at the Knesset. So the whole discussion about the emergency legislation, it was a tactical discussion whether the coalition will be able to pass this legislation. Nobody talked about the significance or the meaning of having two sets of a legal system. Nobody talked about the essence, moral implications of such a law. Everything has to do with interests, and they don't take into account, and that would be my final remark, what they don't take into account, and it really bothers me, and I'm not about to talk about solutions, but what they don't take into account is that including moral consideration, when a state thinks about moral consideration, it actually shows that it's powerful. When a state doesn't consider moral consideration, it shows weakness. If we want to be a Western country, we cannot make do with high-tech industry or to market the LGBT community. If Israel wants not to be if Israel wants not to be blamed for being an apartheid state, because what's happening in Judea and Samaria, not within Israel, but in Judea and Samaria, do you know that all those reports they wrote were about Israel and not Judea and Samaria? So what is happening in Judea and Samaria, it's an apartheid policy. What is happening in Israel with the Arab citizens, it's established discrimination. We haven't solved it since Israel was established, even if there is one Arab party in the government. But if we're not want to be, if we don't want to be perceived as such a state, we need to take other considerations. And I think that we're not taking into account that, of course, the Palestinians are immediate victims of our control that lasted for 55 years, but we also pay a high price. The price of bereavement, moral decay, the way they see us around the world, and infringing the democratic essence of Israel. We also pay the price. What leadership ever said we need to stop occupation? It's immoral. We always think about tactical, strategic considerations. Who was the last one to say occupation makes us corrupted? Palestinians, by the way, are here. They are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. They're going to stay here. They are our problem. We cannot repress them. We cannot deny it. They are here to stay, and we have responsibility. We have to look at the Palestinian concept as part of Israel's foreign policy. And if the American administration established a whole human rights division. So it can't be that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is no such a division. Nobody focuses on human rights. So, and even if they do, it's very marginal. It's not established. So they don't. Leaders, of course, don't think about it. And if Bennett behaves as he behaves, with regards to the way Israel does with Russia and Ukraine, if we continue to control people and stop this policy, I don't think we can foresee a bright future. And I believe that we can have a brighter future. That's why I'm struggling